there's one thing that I've learned on my spiritual journey, it's that there's so much that I don't know. So I'm on a mission to remedy that, to discover what it is that I don't know and to let it transform me in the process. So, do you prefer going by Dan or Daniel?
Either one's fine. Most people just call me Dan.
We'll go with Dan. Dan's nice.
Dan's good. Dan's good.
Very classic. So, I'm so curious because you have so much interesting stuff that goes on around you, from the group you have with the Heretical Order of Unusual Spiritual Exploration.
Yes.
To the poetry you do, to the protesting that I've seen you do.
Uh-huh.
You are so very active and involved in a lot of different interesting things.
It's funny because ultimately I want to just be like a hermit living in my cave and just hide away. But there's so much that needs to get done. I can't just be in my cave. I gotta go out. I gotta do things. Yeah.
That's valid. I feel that definitely sometimes.
Yeah.
So let's go. We're going to jump back to the beginning. So how do you get into spiritual exploration? How does that come about?
Well, I grew up in the Nazarene Church. Went to, Lake Avenue, Church of the Nazarene until it moved off of Lake Avenue and they changed the name to Grace Point. Went to Olivet Nazarene University, and it was at Olivet that, I'd always kind of struggled a little bit, I wanted to believe, but I always kind of had this lingering doubt in my mind. I'm like, do I really believe any of this? Am I just trying to make it work, or do I believe in this? And Olivet really kind of pushed me to start thinking, just cause I didn't like a lot of what, I was seeing. And I know I took a postmodern philosophy class while I was at Olivet, which was largely geared towards helping Christians try to explain their faith to people who don't believe in, to people who don't believe in Jesus, but do kind of have a more, wild postmodernist worldview and whatnot. But, it kind of, if anything, helped me maintain my values while I was getting rid of Christianity. Realize, okay, well, I don't need to just throw the whole thing away. I can still keep these Bible verses here that I know and I like. Even when I was considering myself to be, just straight up atheist, I still very much enjoyed discussing the Bible and quoting the Bible, usually with people who were misusing the Bible to do whatever horrible political thing they want to do. I take advantage of the fact that I know the Bible too, and I'm like, well, what about the Sermon on the Mount? What about the parable of the sheep and the goats? What are you doing? What are you doing for this?
Really?
Yeah. But, so it was, a couple years ago, actually when I just started at the post office, a friend of mine there, I'd watched a video on, Aleister Crowley. And, I was talking about how, cause my wife has always believed, even after she was also a Christian. She grew up Lutheran, but wasn't nearly as involved in the church as I was. And so she's always been very fascinated by alternative spiritual paths and witchcraft and goddesses and all that. She's always been very into that sort of a thing. Right. And, I would kind of, I'm fine with the fact that you do it, but I don't know. And, so I was talking with a friend of mine at work, and he, saying wouldn't it be cool if these sort of things were real? If there, if there was magic, if there was this and that. And he kind of challenged me a little bit to say, why don't you think they're real? Have you studied any of them? Have you studied a religion outside of Christianity before? And that, that really made me think on there, that there is so much more out there. Someone, I forget who this was, but someone on Twitter as well pointed out around that same time that it's kind of egotistical, especially if you look at like the new atheists that were all the rage in the early 2000s, like you have like the Richard Dawkins and the Christopher Hitchens and a lot of the young men who were like myself around that time who were, kind of going along with that.
Right.
It's kind of egotistical for, a white guy to decide that the religion that I was born into, I don't agree with this religion, therefore every other religion all throughout the world, all of those religions are bunk because I don't like the church that I grew up in.
That's a good point.
Like, why shouldn't I? So that's when I started, my mom had gotten me a copy of the Nag Hammadi library so I could, look at some of these heretical books that weren't allowed in the Bible. So I had that, and that was when I really just started trying to find out more. I have a Quran, but I'm having finding just reading it from the beginning is kind of tough.
Ooh, that's fair.
And I know a lot of, from the Christian standpoint, when you're bringing someone into the church, you usually don't sit them down and have them, just start in the book of Genesis and just read on, So I'm trying to find videos online, where people will talk more about Islam. I want to get a copy of more scriptures as well from different religions, But yeah, right now I'm just kind of trying to explore, trying to learn about what all these different religions might be about. So yeah.
So you were with your wife for a while and she was into witchcraft, but you weren't into any of that until the last few years.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
I was clarifying I understood you correctly.
So when she would do little rituals, do a full moon thing here or do something there, and it actually worked out really well. It was a couple months after we got married. I remember we drove down to Fort Wayne because we stayed at my grandparents' lake house for our honeymoon. We were going to Fort Wayne so we could drop off the keys with my mom.
Right.
And it was on our way back where we first had the conversation. We'd gone to the church where I grew up, which is actually the same church where we got married.
Gotcha.
We'd gone to that church and we'd been kind of looking for a church in the area of Illinois where we lived.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But we were on our way and we were, that church service, it really didn't do anything. Oh, it really didn't do anything for me either. And I forget which one of us asked it first, but someone said, do you even believe any of this anymore? I don't even know if I believe in any of this. And fortunately we were on the same page there, because I've heard that things can get rather rough when one person is an atheist and the other person is a Christian, but you're still married and trying to make it work. That can get a little
headbutt,
little sticky.
Yeah.
But fortunately, neither one of us did.
Yeah.
But yeah, she's always been much more spiritually attuned towards that, where
the more alternative spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
That's fair.
So
I'm curious. So there's so much I want to dive into on some of the things you're saying. Yeah. So I guess in the beginning, when you're in this religion, what are the doubts that you're having that's making you question whether or not this faith is authentic to you?
I know one of the things in college that I know in particular I really started struggling with, Lucifer, Satan. Who is he? How do we get here? If you read the old, the first mention, they mention the serpent in the Garden of Eden, but the serpent as like, strictly in that text, the serpent is not a fallen angel who is now the adversary of God and the Lord of hell. It's just a talking snake who, tries to convince Eve, hey, you should eat this fruit.
Yeah.
And when, in the book of Job, when you first see the word Satan appear, the word that they use is more like a prosecutor, like a prosecuting attorney. And if you look at his role in the book of Job, God saying, telling his angels, oh yeah, Job's such a great guy, he's so loyal. And the prosecuting attorney comes up and says, yes, you see, he's loyal now, but what if you were to take all his riches away? What if you were to take his family away? Would he still praise you then? Right. So, looking at that, and also just the concept of the afterlife. If you look at the Old Testament, the afterlife is almost never mentioned. One of the few times I know, when Saul is battling against David and he's trying to, really solidify the kingdom of Israel, I know Saul summons Samuel's ghost using a witch, not even using anything Christian well, not Christian because there was no Christ yet, but not even using any form of Judaism to do it. He uses one of the witches that he himself has outlawed and has her summon. But Samuel doesn't mention anything about there being a heaven. Samuel doesn't mention anything about hell. He mentions being unhappy that he's been brought back to earth. Yeah. but that's so where is it? Why is there no mention of heaven and hell until you get to the New Testament? That was one of the things that made the Pharisees so radical in their time. We Christians think of them as, the Pharisees, they're the ones that persecuted Jesus. But in the context of Judaism, the Pharisees were Jews who believed in an afterlife. Right. Which traditional Judaism did not.
Fair. I think the Sadducees,
right? Sadducees were much more of the establishment Jews as compared to the Pharisees. And so, that really got me questioning, kind of some of the differences between Old Testament God versus New Testament Jesus. Right. If this is the same guy, why is he so much nicer now? In the Old Testament, he's just getting mad,
He's murking in the Old Testament.
He'll be in a bad mood. I'm just gonna wipe out all these people. And either the angels or a human will have to talk him out of it. Don't wipe out all those people. Yeah.
And he's like, I regret doing that.
Yeah. So those were kind of the things that made me really start wondering, is this real? Is this allegory? Is this mythological? Where did all this come from? Yeah. Which, when you're at a Nazarene college, not the time you want to be struggling with these things.
That's kind of might be an enemy territory, actually. Fair. So now, was there a point where you kind of had that flip switch? Was it that time with you and your wife in the car going to that church, or was there a point that you can pinpoint hey, I'm not a Christian anymore, or I'm not really this traditional belief. Yeah. These aren't my beliefs anymore.
That was the official flipping of the switch, but I know there were several points. I know in high school I had a couple, and in college I had a couple. There were a couple points where I knew I was basically just going through the motions. Yeah. It was still my culture. It was still my people. All my family and friends are involved in the church. So I was still going through it, but I knew that my heart wasn't in it.
Right.
So, but yeah, it wasn't until my wife and I had that talk that it became officially acknowledging this is, I don't believe this and it's okay. Yeah, I don't need to try to make myself believe this anymore.
Right.
So
after that point, what did you deal with any like feelings of guilt or feelings of like shame? You know, sometimes you get those negative feelings when you're like getting rid of old beliefs and old values and like old ways of thinking.
Not so much guilt and shame. I don't sometimes I would find, like, you know, in times of hardship and struggle, sometimes I missed some of the certainty that I used to have.
Fair.
You know, like, you used to think, oh, hey, there's a God up there who's looking out and taking care of all this, so I don't need to worry about it. If there is no God who has a plan, if that God's not going to solve these problems, then I have to solve them. I have to take the things that I believe in, and I have to actually try to work to make them happen in the world.
Right.
Because I can't just rely on someone else to do it for me.
Absolutely. So we lost about like 20 minutes of solid conversation dealing with like soul vessel dynamics, on top of like certain esoteric ideas and concepts. So you don't get that, but you get the rest.
Turned off twice.
It did. Every time we got to the same subject. So apparently the universe wasn't ready for that. But continuing. Oh, man, I'm trying to think of where to pick up because now.
The key points were some of the pitfalls of like religion, and you were talking about the soul versus the physical.
Right.
Not getting caught up in like the afterlife, that kind of stuff. But you also touched on doing things actively. Like the fact that if you're not, you know, sometimes manifestation ain't happening for you. You still gotta do things.
Yeah.
Fair.
That's a quick synopsis.
That's a quick synopsis
of some key points.
Yeah, that works. So all the last 20 minutes maybe.
I know.
20 minutes weren't recorded, which is also sad.
We did lose a little bit. Yeah.
So I guess we're gonna pick up where we were gonna pick up. How has your spirituality influenced your interpersonal communications and relationships with others?
Like, even when I was, and you know, like just flat out considering myself an atheist, religion is a good way to understand someone else. If you know more about their religion, then you know a lot about them. You know about what they believe, what motivates them, and so you kind of know how to talk to them. You know, I know that was something in the, you know, I mentioned taking postmodern class when I was at Olivet. One of the things in there they talked about spiritual languages and like a spiritual lens through which you see the world and whatnot. So that, you know, learning more about religion, even if I were to ultimately come away from this, you know, still feeling like there's nothing more than this life that we have here, even then, you know, learning more about religions, about, you know, all the different religions will help me understand people more. Yeah. And so even if that's all I get out of it, that in and of itself is worth it.
Right.
But, you know, it helps me connect with other people because, you know, I see us as being a part of a whole. Yeah. You know, we're not just individuals. You know, your individual is trying to stop my individual. We need to battle for resources and whatnot. No, you know, we're all a part of this world. We're all here. We can work harmoniously together to make things, you know, to make things better. And, you know, so that's really kind of where I want to focus my, you know, my relation with others. Yeah. As far as my poetry and art goes, like I very much find that a lot of the times I almost don't know something until I write it. Right. You know, like writing about spiritual themes, writing about mysteries or that I'm grappling with or something like that. That's a good way of just helping myself figure out what is it that I believe. Yeah. So that's a good, and it's also a good way of communicating to others what it is that I believe.
Right.
Because not everyone's going to want to sit down and have this long of a talk.
I feel you.
Most people, their eyes kind of glaze over a little bit. You know, and you start talking too much about religion. Either that or they want to fight you if you're talking about different religious beliefs.
You either get the lead paint stare or you get somebody waiting to throw fisticuffs at you. Yeah, that's fair. I really want to talk about that, the spirituality and depression again, because I feel like that would really about help to bring it up again too. So as somebody that deals and fights with depression, while you're going through this spiritual journey that you're going through, do you have any reservations or guilt about leaving the religion for this journey, or do you ever feel like when you're going through a really depressive episode you're doing something wrong, or you're not spiritual? When
I was a Christian, I used to have massive guilt over my depression, because if you're feeling depressed and you're feeling hopeless, obviously you don't have enough trust in Jesus, because if you did have enough trust in Jesus, you wouldn't be feeling depressed and hopeless.
Yeah.
So and I definitely, it's a struggle to try to, when I'm going through, a kind of a depressive episode, it is kind of a struggle to remind myself that there is hope in the world, that there is, there's meaning to what we're doing. It's not just, all futility, building sandcastles that, are going to get knocked away by the tide as soon as it rolls in. We're building towards something. Even if I don't know what the something is, we're building towards that. I never want to put too much focus on just living in the next world, all our problems are going to be solved in the next world, because, that can be kind of a cop-out.
Yeah.
I used to do that for a long time, back when I was more politically conservative, I would say, I want poor people in my community to be fed, but I'm not actively feeding them, but it's okay because God's going to take care of them.
Right.
So, that was me using religion as a cop-out to not help people.
Yeah.
And, so I very much believe that, because we are here, because we have this spiritual energy in us, we're obligated to shape the world around us. We're obligated to help people, because if we're not going to do it here, how can we do it in the next world?
Absolutely.
Even if it does turn out that this world is just practice for another world, you need to practice now. You need to get these things right, because you can't just, if the church is supposed to be Christ's body, that body needs to get up and do things. Right. If I am just a part of the universal light, the ego that is me is just a small part of a bigger universal soul. That ego that is me. I'm here now to do stuff. I'm here to get in there and make a difference. You can't just wait around for something else to do it for you.
Exactly. So, I totally agree with that. Yeah. I think there's 3 points I wanted to make on that. I think when, especially getting to spiritual circles, when we left religion and we're exploring a little ourselves, I feel like there's this idea that enlightenment or spiritual progress means that you're not supposed to get depressed anymore. Or you're supposed to be in a state of peace all the time.
Yeah.
And, you're supposed to ditch the negativity and the human emotions. And so I feel like it paints a disingenuous picture, because spirituality, or alternative spirituality, it doesn't eradicate your negativity. It doesn't eradicate your experience as a human.
Yeah.
And so I feel like it's okay, understanding that you're still going to have bad days, you're still going to have low moments, you're still going to have some episodes. I feel like it doesn't take away from you being a spiritual person. It doesn't take away from what you're trying to do.
That's just repressing your emotions.
Essentially.
Repressing your emotions is not spiritual development.
No, it does not go well. Oh, man. I also wanted to say, I think that there is a very big cop-out when you try to solely focus on, what this point in the future, or, God's going to do that, or in the afterlife, that everything will be taken care of and everything will be worked out. I think I have a lot of experience, especially growing up as a witness, in a very religious environment. it's very easy to just say, oh, God's going to take care of it, or like the new system's going to make it all better, because then it doesn't inconvenience you in the now. You don't have to go out and like do anything. You like will go out and preach, or like you'll give a sermon or a talk or whatever, or you'll have some comfortable ideas that you can say, some nice things to say, but you don't actually have to go out and give a homeless person food. Nothing's required from you to just say things, especially when you have this far off mentality. Oh, it's going to happen then, which I feel like it's good to not have that anymore. When you don't have that like safety net of just, like the deity's gonna take care of that. When it's all on you, it forces you to either like, you're either gonna get up and do something, or like you're gonna waste away. And
you gotta put up or shut up.
Exactly. It's like, do something then. Oh man. So I guess, let's just jump into it. What's your view of the world so far? Like of how everything works. I want to know, what do you think on the afterlife, on this life? How does everything tie together so far for you?
So far, I just look at it as, this is the blueprint. Like this is where we are. If there is another world beyond this one, then this world is kind of the key to figuring that out. You look at the beautiful things that are here, and it's a glimpse into the beauty that can be elsewhere. You look at the terrible things that happen here, and that can give you a glimpse into the problems that can be going on. It's all just part of a whole, and I'm just trying to better understand how those parts work. That's where I'm trying to just learn about multiple different religions. Try to figure out what people believe, because that way I can know if there's truth in there. The hidden treasure hadith, not an official hadith, but as a Sufi Islam, there's a saying that they refer to as a hidden treasure hadith, not accepted full on as part of the Quran or a part of the teachings of Muhammad, but there's a saying, I being God, I was a hidden treasure, and I wanted to be known, so I created the world so I could know myself.
Ooh.
I like that way of looking at that way of looking at spirituality, of looking at God, of looking at the universe. That by figuring out what we believe, by figuring out how we can make things better here, we are making things better beyond us. We are making things better in a overall spiritual sense.
Right. I rocks with that. I feel like I think everything matters. I don't think there's any action you take that doesn't matter. I feel like whether it's like making things better, making things worse, or whatever the case is, I feel like it always has an effect that you can't see, that reaches beyond you. But I do want to touch on that idea of, when you say truth, what is your compass when you're navigating all these different beliefs and all these different like theologies and ideas and concepts? What's your like compass that points you to, okay, this is true for me, like I believe this?
A lot of that just depends on ultimately, like, is it harming? Is it helping? How does this affect the other people around me? Does this help me? Is this, kind of, like, there can be all sorts of different tools, but if it's not the tool that I need for the job, then I don't need this tool right now. Right. So, there are a lot of different teachings out there, and I guess the ones that resonate with me are the ones that I can put into practice, are the ones that will help me, will help others. Right. Those are the things that are true. The bits that I don't need, those are fine stories. Those are fine lessons. Yeah. But I don't need that part. So.
Gotcha. So like, it as true if it has practical application. If you can take that and positively impact your sphere and the people around you, that to you, that's the truth.
I like. Yeah.
Okay, cool. I rocks with that. Well, say less. You will find Dan fighting the good fight.